Life is a very interesting enterprise. We step into a drama that's already underway. I started life on December 3rd, 1941. And as I exited the womb, I anticipated entering a society with people who loved me, who cared about me. I didn't know what I was getting into. Neither do you. But we learn as we grow. I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by people who did care about me, who gave me information about where I was. I found out later that that information was limited. They were reluctant to give me the whole story out of fear that somehow it might interrupt my growth and development. Probably right. But I was a fairly prescient kid, and I found out myself. I began to search for answers. By the time I acquired the power of speech, I began to ask people, what on earth is going on? How did you allow this situation to develop? Because what I had stepped into was a society that by law and by custom had arranged itself in such a way as to leave me on the margin. I didn't count. I was ruled one of the undeserving people. And I thought that a bit strange. I didn't know what to do with it. It was certainly frightening. And it made no sense. It was irrational. It was illogical. And I came into the universe with some sort of a DNA component that required that things fit together in some reasonable way. Nothing was to be found. By the time I got to grade school, however, things began to open up a bit. In first grade, the first grade teacher said to all of us in the segregated first grade classroom, you kids, she said, have to take on executive responsibility for learning. You have to become CEO of your own independent learning enterprise. That made sense to me. I don't know if the first grade teacher understood exactly what she was doing, but she started a fire that has never been quenched. And it helped me because that was salvation, learning, knowing. You see, the only thing that separates any two people in the universe is how much either one knows compared to the other. When you know, then you can have a range of choices and options that are unavailable to the person who doesn't know. That made sense to me, so I became a learner. And now, as I go around the country, I encourage young people to take on executive responsibility for learning. And when you think about it, you are the only ones who can do that. Nobody else can take that responsibility, not your parents, not your teachers, nobody. It's your responsibility to choose to learn. Then you develop the habit of learning, then it becomes easy. And I know it's tough, you know. I talk to middle schoolers a lot, and they fret and chafe about homework. And I always scream at them and say, no, 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 you should be asking for more homework. They don't like that. But it's true, because there is so much to be known, we can never know it all. Then I found out that things were worse than I thought. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in the Plessy v. Ferguson case that separation was constitutional. The doctrine of separate but equal was the law of the land when I was born. So for my first 13 years, I had to operate under the aegis of that particular decision. In 1954, then something magical happened. The same Supreme Court, by the way, ruled in the Brown case, Brown v. Board of Education, that it was no longer constitutional to discriminate against people of color. Now I thought, this is odd, because in 1896, the Constitution said that we could discriminate. Now in 1954, the Constitution is now singing a different song, and I'm confused. And I'm wondering, where is Scalia when you really need him with his strict constitutionalist approach? I don't know if that makes sense at all, but in any case, I was happy in 1954 because now the law is on my side. The law says, Terry Roberts, you have the right to go to your neighborhood school. That's what it meant. People often ask me, did you go to Central for better education? Did you go there to make a point? Were you there because of pressure from the community? No. I was modeling law-abiding behavior. That was my sole reason for going. I wanted to demonstrate to the world that we who profess to be a law-abiding nation could in fact be law-abiding. So my going to Central High School was modeling law-abiding behavior. It, of course, didn't excite the folk who were there in opposition because they felt the law was wrong. You know, in the wake of that Brown decision, a huge outcry. You could hear it all over this country. People were not happy. Over 100 members of the U.S. Congress at that time penned their names to a document we know as the Southern Manifesto. In that document, they pledged to do whatever they could do, whatever was within their power, to prevent implementation of the Brown decision. That was the revelation to me, that even though the law was on the books, it didn't really mean much. In fact, when you look at the wording of the implementation phase of the Brown decision itself, you see the truth of the matter. It was deemed that we will proceed with, quote, all deliberate speed. And when you look up the word deliberate in any dictionary, the first synonym that jumps out at you is slow. That was a not too veiled message to the Dixiecrats that it's okay, boys, things will be as usual. We won't get in your way. You can still discriminate, and we will do what we can to help you. Now begins my real civic education. I begin to understand, so this is where I live, okay? We live in a country where we can say one thing but do another, and it's okay. Very interesting, very interesting. I was terrified by it because it meant that my life was going to be really rougher than I had anticipated. But I was ready to take it on, especially when you're young. Young people death defy through life all the time. You do things. You know, we had been warned that if we volunteered to go to Central High School, we would be killed. All 9 of us had to be fingerprinted by the local police department so that when our bodies were found, not if, but when, identification would be an easy task. So there was some concern about this. But we got up there, and eventually the president did send in the army, and we were able to get into school, but that was not the end of the hostilities. That was simply the beginning. People in Arkansas, in Little Rock, were so outraged, and the governor spouting off his rhetoric about having now become an occupied territory. People took that as an invitation to get rid of us, and they tried mightily to do so. Anything that you can think of that one human being might possibly do to another is what they did to us. Inhuman is saying it mildly, but we persevered. We actually, as a group of 9, decided to employ nonviolence as our response to all of this madness. We had been cautioned by Dr. Martin Luther King that nonviolence could only work, however, if we truly loved our enemy. So we took some time to reflect on that, and to the degree that we understood love and the concept of enemy, we said, yes, young people do those kinds of things. Whether we knew what we were doing or not is beside the point. Basically, we said we're not going to fight back, which was not entirely true, because when you're that young, your concepts get a little confused. So even though you profess nonviolence, there are times when you do fight. And in fact, I don't often talk about that because that's not what the public wants to hear. But our nonviolence had a few caveats. In any case, we got through the year. Somehow, we made it through. Well, 8 of us made it through the entire year. Minnie Jean Brown, one of our number, actually got kicked out of school in February of 1958. Why? Because she had reached that point where nonviolence didn't make much sense going forward, so she began to fight. The school, in its great wisdom, determined that they were going to kick her out, so they did. They expelled her. Unfortunately, in the wake of her expulsion, little cards were circulated all over that campus, 1 down, 8 to go. So they cranked the pressure up on the rest of us. So between February and May, we really had to fight hard to maintain our nonviolent stance. Well, we did. I was in the 11th grade. The next year, the governor decided to do something different. Orville Faubus. He had fretted that entire year about the fact that he had not been able to keep black kids out of this school where he wanted white kids only. He said to himself, I suppose, I've got to think of something else. So over the summer, he came up with a brilliant plan. At least he thought it was brilliant. He said, I got it. I know what I'll do. I will close the schools. I will keep the black kids out. So he closed all high schools in Little Rock, all the public high schools. And he was satisfied with himself. But unfortunately for him, and I suppose it's important to say that he wasn't a very bright person, he didn't realize that by closing the schools to keep the black kids out, he would also keep the white kids out. That part escaped him somehow. But by the way, that's not so unusual when you think about American politics. You do not have to have a measurable IQ to hold public office. That's not a given. You need to be chronologically eligible. You need to have enough money to pay for the filing fee. But then, if you're charismatic enough to convince enough like-minded idiots to vote for you, you can hold office. In fact, we are approaching such an enterprise this coming November. But as a consequence of the school's closure, rather than languish in Little Rock, wondering what next for myself, remember, I'm now the executive in charge of my own education, I determined that I'm not going to stay and wait. I take up an offer from relatives who happen to live in Los Angeles. I move out, enroll in Los Angeles High School, convince my family of origin to follow me from Little Rock to LA. All of the members of the Roberts clan relocated from Little Rock to LA in 1958. We gave up our Little Rock visa permanently. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Little Rock. It's okay. You don't have to go. I'll tell you all you need to know. In fact, once you've been to Little Rock and then you leave, there's no real incentive to go back, especially if you've been gone for a couple of weeks or more. But in any case, I continued my learning and my life. I graduated from LA High, continued with undergraduate degrees and master's degrees, and then took a doctorate in psychology in Southern Illinois. But all of this time, I'm thinking that I don't think that just having a career and doing those kinds of things makes the most sense for me. I need to figure out some way to create a society where people can experience life differently than the way I had to experience it. And so I began to develop some ideas and thoughts about what to do. So as I practiced psychology for about 30 years, I began to formulate other plans, and I've come up with a notion that says we need to have people understand more about their role in society as members of society. So what I've been doing lately is talking about what we need to do. And one of the first things that we need to do is to accept the fact that we, as individuals, have responsibility. You cannot put this off on other people. You cannot say it's the government's responsibility. No, it's the job for each one of us. But in order to do anything at all, the very first step is you knowing who you are, understanding what's going on inside your own head, examining that dialogue that goes on 24 hours a day nonstop. What messages are you telling you? And one of the first things you will discover is that you have to deal first with whether or not you firmly believe that you have profound significance in this universe. And as Christian people, it could be an easy task. I don't say it will be or is, but it could be an easy task for you if you understand God's love for you. So profound significance. If you truly believe that God loves you, then it's an easier task to feel that profound significance, because now you are not at the mercy of other people who are telling you who you are, even though it has nothing to do with who you are. I am one of those people in the universe who feels very fortunate to have learned this at an early age. I had a mom who, I don't know where she got these ideas, but she inoculated me and my 6 siblings with this same information. And I say inoculated because it was just that. She said to us, what other people think about you is none of your business. It's their business. And that alone will free up so many people. Because if you truly understand that what other people think about you is not your business, you are then free simply to think about your estimate of who you are. Your belief is in you, not in what other people think. You are not blown away by the applause or the criticism of others, because you realize that neither one of those two have anything to do with who you really are. It's the way other people see you. There are millions of people out there in the world who don't like you. You don't know who they are, but it has nothing to do with you. And when you bump into them, rather than be surprised, know in advance that they're out there so that you are not impacted by them. It's a little harder to do in real life, but as you begin to think about it and let that idea seep in, and you really grasp that notion of profound significance, that's about you relating to you. And then the second step in this process is how you get along with other people in intimate relationships. And so after profound significance comes this notion of unswerving authenticity. Unswerving authenticity. What does that mean? It means that you make decisions about what you do, especially in relationship to other people, not on the basis of what's expected of you by others, not on the basis of what you think will get you into the club or what you think will garner you acceptance, but what you know to be morally right, what you know that God wants you to do. And then you can, as my mom used to say, if 50,000 of your friends turn left, but you deem it more appropriate to turn right, then by all means turn right and don't look back. That makes sense. That's unswerving authenticity. Now, you can't have that until you have delved into profound significance. It just makes sense, because you don't have the foundation for it. But think about that, and think about the freedom it allows you when you have this unswerving authenticity. And then the third step in this short three-step process is self-giving love. Now, this is you in relation to the entire world, because the ultimate goal of all of this is to love as the flower in the field breathes its fragrance into space and everybody benefits. Your love is not withheld. That is big, that is vast, but so important. I didn't have all of this in mind when I was a student at Central High School, but I had the beginnings of it because of what I had experienced as a very young child with the kind of mom I had. To tell you something else about what she did for me, she told me there is no such thing as race. This was well before I had encountered people who believed differently. I grew up thinking that everybody thought the way I did. And my mom had told me there's no such thing as race, and I believed her, and it's true. There is no scientific, no biological basis for race at all. But why do we believe in it? Because we've been duped. We've been duped. The first use of that word race, as it refers to groups of people, is a late entry into the human lexicon. I think you can find the first entry if you delve into the annals, and you'll find somewhere in the mid-16th century that there's the first recorded instance of that word being used in relationship to people. Prior to that, we were members of families, of clans, of groups, of regions. A group of pseudoscientists got together and decided that they wanted to create something different. So they came up with this notion of race, and they created a hierarchy, racial hierarchy with whiteness at the top and everything else underneath. And they sold it to us as a group of folk in the world, and we bought it without question and ran with it. And today, it is a very strong concept. If you go out in here to the streets of La Mirada and ask the first person who comes by, are you a member of a race? And he or she might say, yes, and I'm proud to be a member of fill-in-the-blank race. Oh, yeah. It's all baloney. There's no such animal. That's problematic, though, because the belief is at bone marrow level for most of us. And when you take that away, you wonder, well, what about this difference? We are all different, yes, but it has nothing to do with race. The answer is very simple. It's ancestry. Your ancestors determine who you are and what you look like. It's very simple, very simple. And you think about it, you have thousands, maybe even millions of ancestors. You know, it's like a funnel. You know, you start off with this group of folk coming together, and eventually there's you. And then you participate at some point, some of you, not all of you, but some of you will have progeny, just as well. But the idea is, when you really know the truth, that's why learning is so important. You cannot afford to live your life on the sound bites and the buzzwords of our times. You have to do the hard work of learning. And so as you do that, and as you develop and accept this profound significance, and I think that is so important, and then live your life with unswerving authenticity, and then learn how to give yourself away in love to all comers. And there again, my mom stands as an absolute model. She was a hugger. If you were within hugging distance of that woman, she would hug you. Just automatic. I lean in the direction of emulating her. I'm not there yet, because there are some people I will run away from. I will not hug some people. Not yet. I'm working on it. But I'm not there. And I have this image of my mom hugging anybody, so that's my goal. I keep that as my goal. And it reminds me, too, the fact that I haven't made it there yet, is I've got a lot of work to do. And so I go naked to the mirror all the time and ask myself really hard questions. And I get answers that are sometimes very disturbing when I have to encounter what's inside my own narrative I am not perfect, neither are you, which is why I feel comfortable here. But our imperfection need not be permanent. So our knowledge, which is very limited, need not be a permanent state either, because we can get rid of our storehouse of ignorance through learning. And as I said before, you won't ever learn everything there is to be known, which, by the way, means that you will be a lifelong learner if you buy into this concept, and I hope you will. I certainly do. And so it is that Little Rock continues to be a beacon, not because it is anything dramatic or different from all the other stuff. We just happen to have timing on our side. Some people have asked me sometimes, well, why is Little Rock so recognized in the world? Just a matter of timing. You know, TV was very new in 1957. Not everybody had TV, only a few people. But those grainy black and white images were beamed out all over the entire world. And so it is that we now see it as some sort of beacon and a standard. And somebody today in the other session referred to me as an icon. That's very interesting. That was a new concept. I'm still working with it. But at any rate, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So